Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. We got open forum today. You're welcome to call if you've got a question about Catholic faith. 888-318-7884. Second hour, I think Jim Blackburn will be with us. First hour, it's Jimmy Akin, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers. And you know when Jimmy's here, you can ask him anything. 888-318-7884. Hi, Jimmy.
Hi, Cy Kellett, host of Catholic Answers Live.
It's nice to see you again.
Likewise.
This is one of those weeks. It happens every now and then for scheduling reasons where we just don't see as much of you. And I feel bad about that. It's nice to see you for an hour anyway.
Well, likewise.
Again, the number 888-318-7884. But two lines open right now because people know Jimmy's coming and they start dialing before the show even starts. 888-318-7884. Jimmy, in addition to being senior apologist here, is author of a bunch of books, including The Bible is a Catholic Book, and he's the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. What drops tomorrow, Jimmy?
Tomorrow we're going to be telling the story of Paul Amadeus Dienach, a European gentleman who in the early 1900s fell into a coma and experienced the 40th century.
I cannot wait for this one.
Lots of interesting stuff.
And he gives descriptions of the 40th century?
Yeah, he talks about the 40th century, what the culture is like, talks about going to Christmas Eve Mass, all kinds of stuff.
How interesting! But it's from the 19th century.
No, from the early 1900s.
Oh, from the early 1900s. Oh, I was going to say, if it's like a future vision from the 19th century, you might be like, and the horses are much bigger and the carriages are much better.
No, they have, he talks about the vehicles that they have and the different types of them. He also talks about something that sounds like television and something that sounds like a holodeck.
Whoa! All right. I got to hear this one. You're welcome to call Jimmy, 888-318-7884. Lines filling up very quickly. And our first caller is from Germany, so I'm just going to go right to him. Aaron in Germany, watching on YouTube. As I said, you are first up. Go ahead, Aaron, with your question for Jimmy.
Hi. So I have a relative who's a fundamentalist Christian, and she claims that God shows her the future. Now, there have been some times where it has seemed like she has accurately foretold future events, but a lot of the time she's just flat out wrong. Now, recently, she told me that I needed to move and leave where I'm living and go anywhere else, or else something bad would happen to me. But, of course, I can't make a major life decision based off what she says, because a lot of the time she's wrong. So my question is, as Catholics, how seriously should we take people like this who come along and say that God shows them the future or gives them messages? And how can we know if something really is revelation from God or not?
So the basic advice for this kind of situation is given by St. Paul in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. And in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, St. Paul tells the Thessalonians, do not despise prophesyings. So apparently some of them were tempted to do that. If someone was making a prophecy, at least some of them were tempted to just dismiss it. And he says, don't do that. Don't despise prophesyings. Don't quench the spirit, but test everything and hold fast to what is good. So the basic attitude that St. Paul indicates for us is to be open when someone is claiming to receive a supernatural revelation, but be critical, meaning exercise critical thinking. Don't just take it at face value. Don't assume it's true, just like you don't assume it's not true. Instead, do what you can to test it, and if it holds up, if it has signs of credibility, then you want to act on it. Now, in terms of how to go about testing it, there are other passages of Scripture that give us some insight on that. In the Old Testament, for example, if you look in Deuteronomy chapters 13 and chapter 18, it talks about tests for prophets. And one of the things that it says is if a prophet makes a prediction and it doesn't come true, then that prophet was not speaking for God, at least on that occasion. It also says if a prophet makes a prediction and it does come true, but the prophet says, let's go worship other gods, then you know that prophet is not from God and you're not to listen to him. Something similar is said elsewhere in the New Testament, where when it talks about testing the spirits, it indicates that no spirit that's speaking from God is going to deny Christian doctrine by saying things like, for example, Jesus Christ has not come in the flesh, or things like that. So if a given prophecy denies Christian doctrine, then it's not to be listened to. The church also has additional, now there's something to be aware of. There's a bit of a difference in our circumstance today versus back in biblical times. In biblical times, it was still the case that God was giving what's called public revelation, which means revelation that's binding on people in general. Today, he doesn't do that. That era ended with the passing of the apostles, and so today we have what's called private revelation, which is not binding on people generally. And it's also not inspired in the same way that Scripture was inspired, and so there can be admixtures of error in it. And the church has a set of procedures for evaluating whether a given private revelation is credible. Normally that's done by the bishop, but ordinary people can apply the same principles, and they're discussed in a document that's available on the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith's website. It came out in 1978. It's on principles for judging purported apparitions. I also did an episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World on this on private revelations that you might want to listen to, because it goes over those principles, and it's got a link to that document. In addition to revelations that come from God, there is some traction in the history of Catholic thought for people having a natural ability to predict the future. This is something that various doctors of the church, like St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, talked about. In fact, St. Thomas Aquinas talked about this ability as natural prophecy, to distinguish it from the supernatural prophecy that God gives. And one of the characteristics that St. Thomas Aquinas indicated natural prophecy has is it's definitely not infallible. It is sometimes right, but sometimes it's not. It only predicts the future probabilistically, that is, with a degree of probability, rather than indicating this definitely will happen. So if your grandmother, Aaron, did you say it was your grandmother or just another relative?
Aaron?
I'm sorry, I missed that, Aaron?
Just a relative. It's
another relative. Okay. So if your relative is sometimes right about things in a way that it seems to exceed random chance, but she's not always right, St. Thomas Aquinas might look at that and say, well, maybe she's exercising natural prophecy. Maybe she's has some genuine hits where she makes correct predictions that aren't due to just random chance, but then other predictions she makes end up not working out. Obviously, if you're confronted with something like a major life decision, like quit my job and move elsewhere and find a new job, that's something you'd want really good evidence for. And it sounds to me like at this point, you don't have evidence that your relative has that kind of reliability, and that would give you the confidence needed to make that kind of decision. And so it seems to me that the rational thing to do is make your best estimate based on your knowledge of your relative's reliability and act accordingly. And it sounds like right now, the evidence you have doesn't point in the direction of making a major life change.
Aaron, I hope that was helpful to you. I'm going to leave it there because we have to take our first break. Just to remind you again, the 20 Answers sampler of all 47 20 Answers books is 65% off right now. 47 books on almost every apologetics topic you can think of. You get a great education in these 47 books. Easy to read and process, and gives you some very satisfying answers to some very difficult and sometimes just very interesting apologetics questions. 60% off the entire set right now at shop.catholic.com.
We're here for you. Call now. Catholic Answers Live. Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Unplanned, the true story of Abby Johnson.
I would be the youngest director in Planned Parenthood history.
She believed in a woman's right to choose.
I've had an abortion myself, so I don't have any problem with another woman making the same decision.
Until the day she saw something that changed everything.
Tiny, perfect little baby. And then it was just gone.
Now she's pulling back the curtain on the abortion industry. Unplanned.
Available at EWTNRC.com and the EWTN app.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live Open Forum. Jim Blackburn with us second hour. This hour, Jimmy Akin, and lots of folks on the line, so I will keep moving. Next we go to Frank in New York City. New York City! Hello, Frank. Got a question for Jimmy?
Yes, thank you, gentlemen. God bless you.
You too, thank you.
I have a question. Yeah, it might be a little unusual. If you can't answer it, I have a second question that I'm sure you'll be able to answer on Mary. But here's my main question. I've been hearing that there's a growing list of evangelicals and Protestants who have been teaching that the word imputed, like Abraham believed the Lord and it was imputed to him as righteousness, is not really found in the Bible. Reckoned, yes. Deemed, yes. But not imputed, because all too many Protestants take the word imputed and attach the nonsense of eternal security to that. Like people like George Eldon Ladd said it's not found there, Bishop N.T. Wright. These are not Catholics. And I was wondering, do you fellas have any more men that you could give me like as ammunition when I have these debates with Protestants that would hold to that view?
Well, I don't have any particular names I can give you, but I can comment on the general situation. It's not so much the word impute that's involved here. Now, in the Greek text of Romans 4, Paul brings up the example of Abraham, and he says, what then did our father in the faith, Abraham, what did our father Abraham find in regard to justification? And he then points to Genesis 15, where Abraham believes God's promise that he will have offspring, even though he's an elderly man whose wife is barren. But he believes God that he will have numerous offspring, and it says God credited or counted or reckoned or imputed that to him as righteousness. Now, in Greek, the word is logizomai, and it can be translated multiple different ways, just as the Hebrew word back in Genesis 15 can be translated more than one way. Sometimes people will want to translate it as impute, which is a kind of a rare English word. We don't use impute very much these days. It used to be more common than it is, but today a lot of people aren't even really clear on what impute means. But it basically means something like reckon or count or credit or things like that. And those are legitimate translations of the word. So is imputed. It's just unfamiliar to people today, and it can be a little misleading because of the way that it's gotten used in Protestant theology. In Protestant theology, there has been a focus on the righteousness that we receive in justification as what's sometimes called legal righteousness, or you'll encounter a more technical term, forensic righteousness, but it basically means the same thing, that God legally reckons us as being righteous despite our sins. And that's not untrue. God does legally reckon us righteous, and there is, we do find courtroom imagery in the New Testament, in discussions of salvation. Christ is going to be the judge of the world, and if you have a judge, well, that implies a courtroom setting. And so it's not wrong to talk about God legally reckoning us as righteous. The question is that all that's involved? And the Catholic view is no, that's not all that's involved. When God justifies us, he doesn't just legally declare us righteous. He also changes us. He puts the virtue of supernatural love or charity into our hearts. That's something Paul talks about a bit later in Romans. And that changes us. That makes us righteous when we have God's actual love in our hearts. And so it's not simply a legal change. There's also a change in our beings that God brings about. And that's what scholars like N.T. Wright and various other ones who are part of what's called the New Perspective on Paul have been pointing out. Other figures that would say similar things would include not only N.T. Wright, but also James Dunn and a variety of other people. That's James D.G. Dunn or G.D. Dunn. I think it's the D first. But anyway, James Dunn talks about this, as various other people who were connected with the New Perspective on Paul. They would point out, many of them, that Paul does not have a rigid wall here between legal righteousness and transformational righteousness. And if you'd like some additional names to investigate, I would suggest looking up New Perspective on Paul.
Frank, thank you very much for that call. I appreciate it. We are very full. Although I should say the lines are very full today, so I will keep moving. But I hope that was helpful to you. Zach here in Clovis, California, listening on Catholic.com. You're next, Zach. Go ahead with your question.
Hello, guys. So my question is, so if a penitent goes to confession and afterwards they fail to do the penance that was assigned to them by the priest, does that nullify the absolution that was pronounced by the priest? So would they then have to go and confess those sins again by failing to do the penance that was assigned to them?
So it's going to depend on the situation. Mere failure to do the penance does not nullify the absolution. It doesn't reach back in time and undo it. If at the time a penitent is in confession, he has the intention to take reasonable efforts to fulfill his penance, then he's not excluding doing what he needs to do. And as long as you're not excluding what you need to do, then you will be validly absolved. And so as long as you're willing at the time of confession to do the penance, it's going to be a valid absolution. And if then after confession you forget to do the penance or something interrupts and prevents you from doing it, you didn't willfully refuse to do it. And so and if you then go to confession again, not having forgotten or not having had a reasonable opportunity to do the penance, it's not going to affect things. You don't need to reconfess everything. What I would do in such a situation is say, by the way, I forgot to do my previous penance. But you don't need to reconfess all those sins because they were confessed and absolved. On the other hand, if you say to yourself after confession, well, I'm just not going to do this penance, I refuse, then you're in more of a problematic area. There could be a reason that is a legitimate reason, like it's unduly burdensome to perform a particular penance, and you just didn't realize that at the time of your first confession, but then afterwards you get to thinking about it, it's like, actually, that's going to be hard. In that situation, what I would do is in the new confession, I would say, my previous priest in confession assigned me this as a penance, but it's hard for me to do that. Can you assign me a new one? And that would be perfectly fine. On the other hand, if you just say, I don't care, I'm not doing this penance, then, well, okay, then you are turning your back on forgiveness on the terms that God is offering it, and that would be a new mortal sin, and you would need to confess the new mortal sin, but you wouldn't need to go back and reconfess all the previous ones. The only circumstance where you would need to reconfess all the previous ones is if at the time you were in confession, you said, I don't care what this priest assigns me, I'm not doing that. And you had a firm resolution at the time of the original confession not to do the penance, well, then that would be invalidating and you would need to reconfess. But that's the only circumstance where that would happen.
Thanks, Zach. We've got to keep moving. I hope that was helpful. Ann in Pasco, Washington. You are next. Ann, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, our question is, we've just received a mandate from our bishop for our Catholic schools in our diocese that's mandating all our teachers, staff, and volunteers get vaccinated. And there's a group that we don't feel this is fair to the teachers, it's not fair to the parents. What are our options?
Well, you can make your views known to the bishop. Canon law provides the right of the faithful to make their views known to the pastors of the church, provided they do it respectfully, on various matters, including what they think the best policies are. So you can make your views known to the bishop. Hypothetically, after doing that, because you always want to start on the lowest level before you don't jump straight over somebody's head. But if you make your views known to the bishop and there isn't an accommodation that can be reached, then hypothetically you could go to the Apostolic Nuncio in Washington and seek his assistance in appealing the matter upward. But those are your basic options, or you can comply with the mandate if you want to keep exercising these functions. Wow.
So our teachers have been told if they don't get the mandate, they'll be fired, and there's no unemployment per the governor. And so the coercion, free will, by the time we get through the pastors already know, and they're like, our hands are tied because of the bishop. The bishop already knows, and they're like, we're just going to follow the mandate. So basically, if we file in Washington, and meanwhile our teachers are coerced, the families can't go on campus, that's how that... Has your group actually appealed directly to the bishop and said, is there something we can work out? Okay. Yes. Well, then that's what the legal structure in the church would provide. You can appeal the case, and you could ask it to be looked at a higher level, and you could also ask for a stay of the policy until it can be looked at a higher level that would give some additional time before it goes into effect potentially. But I don't know. I don't know how inclined the Holy See would be to insist on a reversal of this policy. I mean, I don't know the details of the policy, but the Holy See has indicated that that it is morally legitimate to use COVID vaccines. And if a bishop in his area, knowing the situation there and knowing the degree to which COVID is breaking out in his area, if he makes a prudential determination that this needs to be done for the safety of the people on the campus, then the presumption is going to be to defer to the bishop based on his knowledge of the local situation and the knowledge that the vaccines can be used morally. At least that's what the Holy See would tend to do in looking at a situation like this. Does the policy allow for any other options, like wearing masks and being regularly tested, or is it just a single must be vaccinated policy? It must be vaccinated, and the bishop stated that they politely have requested all priests to not give any religious exemptions.
Well, then I'm afraid that's about the best I can tell you. It is possible to appeal the situation, but I would be prepared for what to do if the appeal is not granted.
Ann, thank you very much. Appreciate that call and the opportunity to clarify your options. I'm going to move now to Ryan in Wilmington, Delaware, watching on YouTube. Ryan, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, Cy. Hi, Jimmy. How are you?
Good, thank you, Ryan.
So, I've been thinking about this lately, and I know baptism is frequent in the Bible and all, but how do you explain to Protestants about infant baptism, and why didn't the early Christians practice it?
Well, the early Christians did practice it. We have information not from the New Testament, but from shortly after the New Testament in the 2nd century that infant baptisms were being performed. And that doesn't mean they were performed everywhere, but we do have evidence that they were being practiced then. And you can go on Catholic.com and look up our Fathers Know Best tract on infant baptism. It's also in my book, The Fathers Know Best, that gives quotations from the early church fathers and from early Christian inscriptions and things like that that point towards infant baptism being practiced very early on. And that information is consistent with principles that are found in the New Testament, because even though the New Testament doesn't record any explicit, undeniable examples of infant baptism, there are principles in the New Testament that point in this direction. We, for example, see household baptisms being performed, and it's quite possible that those households, or at least some of them, contained children below the age of reason, and that would be infant baptism. There's a little bit more to say about that, so we'll say it on the other side of the break.
Ryan, I hope you can hang on, and we will do that. Jimmy Akin is our guest. The phones have stayed very, very full, so we'll get to as many as we can this hour. And then next hour, Jim Blackburn will be here, so Open Forum continues on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live.
Here's a question. Is it really possible to be friends with someone who died 2,000 years ago? Maybe the problem is that we've grown way too comfortable with the story of Jesus. Nice man, right? Taught us to love one another, said not to judge people. We celebrate his birthday every year. It's time to put away this small, safe version of Jesus, says Cy Kellett. Nobody that bland could have transformed the world. In A Teacher of Strange Things, Cy presents Jesus Christ undiluted by sentiment, with all his radical words and deeds uncensored. Do you know someone, your son or daughter perhaps, or maybe your mom or dad, who needs the friendship of Jesus Christ? Do you? Order your copy of A Teacher of Strange Things by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Catholic Answers is doing it again. We're holding our 7th annual Apologetics Conference this September in beautiful San Diego, California, and we'd like to see you there. Join us September 23rd to 26th for a lively and inspiring conference with an all-star lineup of speakers guaranteed to jumpstart your faith. It's a great chance to meet all your favorite Catholic Answers apologists and very special guests as we spend 4 days talking about worshiping and adoring our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. This is where it all begins. Don't miss what promises to be the event of the season. Join us this September for a conference that is sure to ignite, inspire, and inform your faith. Seats are still available, but they're going fast. Visit CatholicAnswersConference.com or call 888-291-8000 to register.
This is Dr. David Anders. Are your friends or family discouraging you from becoming Catholic?
We can help on Call to Communion tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern.
Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
That's kind of a nice surprise. I totally forgot that it was Groovy Music Day. But Brandon, you have never let us down once. Never once. As a matter of fact, you're... okay, he's pointing to Darren. Thanks for the groovy music. Jimmy Akin is our guest. It's Thursday. It's Open Forum. What else can you ask for? Ryan in Wilmington, Delaware, wanted to know about infant baptism in the early church and in the Bible. You explained to him already that infant baptism is quite common in the early church and it's talked about in the Fathers and in inscriptions. But you wanted to finish up about how to make sense of what the Bible, the New Testament, says.
Yeah, so there are a number of things in the Bible that also point in this direction. One of them is, as I mentioned, the household baptisms that occur. Also, in Luke's gospel in particular, in the passage where people are bringing infants to Jesus for him to bless them, it actually uses the word brephos, which means infant. So when he's challenged about this, he says, "Let the little children come to me, because the kingdom of heaven is theirs." So he considers these children worthy of being brought to him for blessing and as belonging to the kingdom, and that would suggest that they also are worthy of the blessing of baptism and entering the kingdom in that way. And then there's the passage in Colossians where St. Paul flat out describes baptism as the circumcision of Christ. And that's obvious when you think about it. Circumcision is the Jewish ritual of initiation. It's what you need to do if you want to become a Jew. Baptism is the Christian ritual of initiation. It's what you need to do if you want to become a Christian. And so that would suggest that we can learn something about who should be baptized by looking at the case of circumcision. Now, if you're an adult and you want to become a Jew, well, you have believers' circumcision. You already need to believe in the God of Israel to be circumcised. But believers then would circumcise their children and raise them to believe in the God of Israel. And that would, applying the same principle to baptism, the circumcision of Christ, or the Christian equivalent of circumcision, well, yeah, if you're an adult convert to Christianity, like the people we see in the New Testament, because none of them were raised Christian, they have to be adult converts, well, then, yeah, you do need to believe in God and in Jesus. But once you've become a member of God's new covenant, it's okay to raise your children in the faith as well, and baptize them and then raise them to believe in God and in Christ. And this was obvious to people in the early church. In fact, in the 250s, there was a council in North Africa where there was a debate about, should we wait until the 8th day to baptize children? And the reason they were debating that is because the 8th day is when children were circumcised under the Old Covenant. And so they've clearly picked up on this principle, and they're asking, well, so then do we need to wait until the 8th day to baptize them? And the answer that the council arrived at was actually no. In view of the number of infant deaths in the ancient world, it was better to baptize them immediately. So as soon as you could after birth, given the infant mortality rate at the time, don't even wait till the 8th day. But it nevertheless shows that principle is in place. And there's more information about infant baptism on Catholic.com, so just go to Catholic.com and type in infant baptism.
Thanks, Ryan. We go now to Raleigh, North Carolina, watching on YouTube, Prasad. I beg your pardon. Prasad, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hey, Jimmy. Can you guys hear me?
Not that well. Are you on speakerphone?
Yes, I might be. Let me.
Yeah, general piece of advice for the audience: never talk to us on speakerphone. It always talk directly into the phone. It makes it much better.
Okay. All right. Is it better now?
Like a million %.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for having my call. Good evening. My question is, I believe there are 4 kinds of people. So, Gnostic theist, agnostic theist, Gnostic atheist, and agnostic atheist.
Mm-hmm.
And I can make sense of the positions of agnostic theist and agnostic atheist. Agnostic theist means I don't know if there's a God, but I choose to believe so because I think there is one. And agnostic atheist is what I call myself, is I don't know if there's a God, and I don't see any evidence. So until there is one, I won't believe in it. But what I can't explain is the Gnostic stand on either side,
where
know
people
no
claim certainty. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Like that. This is the truth, and this is how it has to be on either side.
Right.
I find it very arrogant, and I wanted to know how you explain it.
Okay. Well, so one of the things that, and by the way, I should probably clarify, I understand what you mean here, but some folks in the audience may not. The term Gnostic in some contexts refers to a specific heresy that existed a number of centuries ago, and so people shouldn't be distracted by that. The basic word gnosis in Greek just means knowing, and so what Prasad is describing is people by Gnostic theist and Gnostic atheist would be a person who claims to know either that God exists or to know that God does not exist. And so in approaching the question, I would say, well, there's, as you've acknowledged, Prasad, there are different degrees of certainty. You could think you are certain that God exists. You could think that you're certain that God does not exist. You could be somewhere in the middle.
And you might be dead center where you feel torn both ways, or you might lean more towards God exists, or you might lean more towards God does not exist. People exist in all of these different states. And in terms of why some people think that they're certain of their position, I mean, I'm not being a Gnostic atheist. I can't fully speak for them, but I would suppose that the reason is because they, like people at the other end of the spectrum who think God definitely does exist, think that they have adequate reasons for that position, for holding that position. And in the case of a theist, someone who does believe God exists, the evidence they would appeal to could be of any number of types. It could be, for example, experiential. They might say, well, I can't speak for other people, but God has just given me an experience that convinces me that he exists, just like people have other experiences that convince them something is real. On the other hand, it may not be experiential. A person might say, well, I'm convinced God does exist because, for example, of philosophical arguments that show he exists. And so they would have a more intellectual rather than experiential approach. And, atheists might say the same thing. They might have an experience that convinces them that God doesn't exist. They might have arguments of a philosophical nature that they think convinces them God does not exist. As a theist, I think that the arguments support God's existence, but in terms of why would people hold the position they do as something they're really truly convinced of, I would say it's because they think they've got sufficient reasons for holding it conclusively, whether they're experiential or philosophical or something else. I wouldn't tend to look at it as arrogant, though. I wouldn't view a convinced atheist as being arrogant just because he's a convinced atheist. I would instead say, oh, well, tell me about it. What are the reasons that you think are sufficient to show that God does not exist? And then let's talk about those reasons and test them and see what comes out of that discussion.
Prasad, I'm interested in how that sits with you.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I agree. I guess it's not arrogance. It is just, I guess, assurance of their own position. But then what you said about experiential evidence and philosophical evidence, I grew up in a different country where people had experiential evidence of another God, and they also had philosophical reasons to believe in another God. So when we have these different evidences who lead people to different, or like, if we have an evidence that lead different people to different conclusions, can we say that it's an evidence?
Well, I would say it's evidence, at least in the subjective sense, that people regard it as a reason for holding a given position. That doesn't mean it's good evidence. Some people might think that they have good evidence that that a particular view is true, and I might disagree. And it doesn't have to be a religious position. It could be anything you want. I mean, someone could think they have good evidence that the CIA is funneling antimatter into our water supply. And I would say, well, I don't know what your reason is for that. I'm interested in hearing it, but I think there's pretty good evidence that the CIA is not putting antimatter into our water supply, because antimatter is the most expensive substance on Earth. It's very hard to make. It's incredibly expensive. And it would cause our water supply to explode if you put it into our water supply in any quantity, and our water supply hasn't exploded. So they might say, well, I've got evidence of this. I might not think it's good evidence, but then that's a question that has to be thrashed out. Whatever the position is, whether it's atheism or Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism or Jainism or whatever it may be, you have to talk to people and find out what persuades them of their position, and then look into it and do an evaluation and test it and see if the reasons hold up or not.
Prasad, we got to go to a break. I hope that was satisfying for you. Thanks so much for your questions. Right now, we've got a great, well, I was going to say a great deal, but it's actually free. We got a free ebook for you over at shop.catholic.com. If you'd like a free ebook answering Protestant objections to Catholic teachings, you can go over to shop.catholic.com right now and get it.
Hello, this is Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of San Francisco. Keep your dial tuned to Catholic Answers Live.
He is only one of 4 popes honored as the Great.
Matthew Bunson and the Doctors of the Church.
St. Leo I was pope at a time when Roman civilization was being overrun by barbarian armies. He stood as a light in the darkness and even saved the city of Rome from destruction by Attila and the Huns. Leo died in 461.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
You've heard that St. Paul Street Evangelization supports hundreds of teams of evangelists sharing the good news. But did you know that some of these teams are public prayer stations? Set up a sign on the sidewalk and offer prayer and encouragement to those you encounter. Everyone needs prayer. Try this new method of witnessing to Jesus. Contact St. Paul Street Evangelization to get started at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
This must be a great show. I honestly feel like we just started. I just looked at the clock and we're almost done with our first hour with Jimmy. And we'll continue with Open Forum, though. Jim Blackburn will be here. But, Jimmy, this has gone very, very quickly.
Time flies when you're having fun.
I guess I'm having fun. Let's go to Noah in Tennessee, watching on Twitch. Noah, thank you so much for your call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi there.
Hi, Noah.
How are you guys doing?
So good.
I'm glad. Okay, so this is kind of an abstract question, but I'll try my best to not be redundant and long-winded. I guess one of the things I've realized, at least a lot historically, is one of the proofs for God is an apparent providential thing. So turning to nature and seeing things like that in form. But I'm curious how the non-stagnant nature of form, as demonstrated in evolution and some of contemporary epistemology and things like that, relates to God's providential nature. It's a lot harder to reconcile. Again, turning to evolution, for instance. I guess that makes sense. Yeah.
So I would say that what recent scientific discoveries have shown us about the way life forms develop over time is that God's providence is even deeper and richer than we previously realized. And it's true that in our own day, we see life forms that are very well adapted to their environments, and they exist within ecosystems where, the predators have the right kind of prey available, and the prey are able to both sustain the predator population, but sustain their own population in a way that their species continues, and they're able to get what they need from the environment. Let's say they're herbivores, there are the right kinds of plants for them to eat. And so we do see sometimes very tightly integrated ecosystems with animals that are very specially adapted to those environments. The fact that it's changed over time doesn't mean that it's separated from God's providence. What that would mean is that God's providence is able to incorporate the changes we see over time. So, for example, 70 million years ago, in the late Cretaceous era, we had different ecosystems, and there were T-Rexes and Triceratops and other dinosaurs that were very well adapted to their environment. And you had predators like T-Rex and prey animals like Triceratops, and you had the right kind of plants for the Triceratopses to eat. And it was just a different ecosystem, but it still existed under God's providence. And God's providence is such that it allows things to change. So 60 million years ago, 65 million years ago, there was a great disaster that caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. It involved, according to the standard scientific account, a big meteor hitting down in the Yucatan, or a big asteroid hitting down in the Yucatan that caused global climate change. And all of that is not in principle different than what we see going on today. It's bigger in scale, but even today, we see animals that are continuing to adapt to their environment, including human beings. There's evidence that in the last few thousand and even in the last few hundred years, humans have continued to adapt by becoming more intelligent and more cooperative, which is why modern humans are able to build bigger and more successful societies than in the past. We're smarter and more cooperative than our ancestors in some ways. We see the same thing with other species. Dogs were originally wolves about 10 or 15,000 years ago, and they've adapted to life with humans, and that's resulted in genetic changes in the dog population. So we see change continuing. It's not that change doesn't happen or that everything needs to stay the same in order for it to be part of God's providence. Instead, we need to recognize that God's providence is richer and deeper and incorporates change. Also, I was going to mention, like, the global winter that the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs produced. Well, that's just a larger scale version of the winter that occurs every year. You know, winter comes, some life forms die off during the winter, then things start regrowing after the winter, and the big dino killing asteroid winter was just a big example of that. But we see change and adaptation going on even in our own day, and that's all taken under the rubric of God's providence. It doesn't conflict with it. It just makes our awareness of how rich and deep God's providence is even more amazing.
Thanks, Noah. I got to keep going. There's just so many folks calling today. Next, Rochester, New York. Scott in Rochester, listening on 92.9 FM. Go ahead, Scott, with your question. Hi, Scott. All right, I'm going to come back to Scott. Let's go to Austin in New York, watching on YouTube. Austin, have you got a question for Jimmy?
Hi, my question is, how is both the church and Mary our spiritual mother? Isn't that like two mothers?
Okay, so the key thing to recognize here is that we have a metaphor. Literally, if you want to be literal, each of us has one biological mother, and any other mother we have is in an accommodated sense. They're not a mother in the biological sense, which is the root sense of the term mother, you know, the woman who gives birth to you. But we have other people, even in our own lives, who can be regarded as mothers, like surrogate mothers. And that can be also understood in a biological sense. But what I'm thinking of is like adoptive mothers, you know, or even if it's not a formal adoption, let's say your own mom has died, but there's a woman who you feel very close to, and she's like a mother to you. She's kind of a stand-in for your mother. After my mom died, I had the benefit of knowing a woman like that who happened to work at Catholic Answers, and she was very much like a mother to me. She was kind of a second mother. And so she wasn't my biological mother, but she was in this extended sense. And that could have been the case even if my biological mother was still alive. I could have mothers in different senses. I have my true mother, my literal mother, my biological mother, but I also have this woman that is, you know, like a mother to me. And that's essentially what we have going on with Mary and the church. In different senses, Mary is our spiritual mother, and the church is our spiritual mother. And these are metaphors that are not meant to be taken literally. And once you're in the realm of metaphor, you have to recognize the truth that's in the metaphor, that is the extent to which it corresponds to reality, but you also have to recognize the limits of the metaphor, that is the senses in which it is not meant to be taken literally. So there are functions the church performs for us that are maternal, you know, the care that the church gives for us, and by her intercession, there are functions that Mary performs for us that are maternal. So the key is just to recognize that we're into the realm of metaphor, and so we shouldn't take this literally and think as if one metaphor must exclude the other, that there's only a single mother we could have. If that was true, then our biological mother would be our only mother. But even in this life, we have other maternal figures in our lives.
Scott, thank you very much. I'm going to go to Marianne in Montana. Marianne, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, Jimmy. I have a question. If selling your soul to the devil is real, if that is something that you can do, and if so, if there is a way to get your soul back, so because I feel several people in public figures have done this, and I pray for them every day. Are those prayers pointless?
So if by selling your soul to the devil, you mean the classic thing where the devil appears and you sign a contract or something, I have no evidence for that ever occurring. That's like something you find in novels like Faust, for example, very famous novel by Johann von Goethe. And then you also see it in movies. When I was a kid, there was even a very short-lived TV show called A Year at the Top that involved selling your soul to the devil as a premise. And the devil was this kind of young hipster guy that had two party hats sewn together so they'd look like horns. You know, those birthday party hats?
I do not remember this show.
He would wear two. But this is fantasy. Now, is it possible for a person to attempt to sell their soul to the devil? Yes, that is possible. Does that have any effects? Well, it may or may not. That subject's a little complex to go into right now. But the key thing is, can you get your soul back? Yes, because souls are inalienable. That means you cannot transfer possession of your soul to someone else. And even if you try, and if you do so knowingly and deliberately, it could be a mortal sin. But all you have to do is repent and go to confession. And even if you can't go to confession, repent and make an act of perfect contrition, and your soul will be saved, because the devil cannot stop God from giving you his grace. And we have God's promise that he will give us his grace if we repent and accept his grace. And so even if someone tried to, quote unquote, sell their soul to the devil couldn't keep it, because God is always willing to take us back no matter what we've done, and therefore we don't need to worry about this.
Does that help, Marianne?
Yes, it does greatly. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very, very much. I was going to refer her to Daniel Webster if that didn't work out. Let's see if we
deep cut there, Psychedelic.
Yeah. Scott in Rochester, New York. We couldn't hear you before, Scott. Have you got a quick question for Jimmy? No, I guess not. Maybe I'm not sure what happened on that line. All right. Jimmy, why don't you tell us a little bit more about Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World tomorrow, since we only got you for a few more seconds.
Okay, well, like I said, we're going to be talking about the case of Paul Amadeus Dienach, who was a Swiss gentleman that went into a coma in the early 1900s and woke up in the body of a man in the 40th century in the year 3906. He had a disease that was actually common in Europe at the time. It was an epidemic of sleeping sickness. And then when he woke up, he wrote all about his experiences in the 40th century. So we're going to be talking about that, and how we know about this, and how accurate it may or may not be, and what's really going on there. We also have some other special episodes coming up, including next month, in just a couple of weeks, we're going to be looking at 9/11. We're going to have an in-depth look at the 9/11 attacks and who was involved, what was involved, what theory of the attacks is actually true, and what the U.S. government really did hide after the fact.
Oh, okay. I got to watch that one, because there's, for some reason, it's 20th anniversary. Yeah, that's why there's a
20th anniversary.
I keep hearing about new documentaries coming out. I think Spike Lee is doing one. I don't know.
Could be. I think I've heard that.
I'm going to turn to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. That's where to find out about that. Thanks, Jimmy. I don't remember. Are we seeing you tomorrow, or is this goodbye for the week?
I think this is goodbye for the week, so have a great weekend.
All right, Jimmy. I'll see you next week. And we'll see you here just a few seconds. Jim Blackburn should be here with us. And so if you're on the line, please stay on the line. We're going to get to your question. If you haven't dialed yet, I'll tell you right now, there's 2 lines open. So you can get in with your question. If you are not a Catholic person, never forget, you're always welcome here. Even if you feel like maybe the question is disrespectful. Sometimes people say, I don't want to be disrespectful. If it's a sincere question about what we believe or why we do what we do, you're welcome. It's not going to offend us. Give a call, 888-318-7884. Oh, 3 lines open now, 888-318-7884. Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Open forum continues, and you are welcome to call, whether you're Catholic or not, whether you're Christian or not, whether you agree with us or disagree with us. It doesn't matter. Whatever. If you got a question, 888-318-7884. Whatever your question is, it is welcome here, because we've got the man who started CatholicQuestions.com, a long time part of the Catholic Answers family. Spent a lot of his life answering questions here, or helping other people answer questions here at Catholic Answers. And now CatholicQuestions.com is where he continues the ministry of just taking obstacles out of people's way by answering their questions so they can come closer to Jesus and the church. Jim Blackburn, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, that's what I did at Catholic Answers for almost 10 years, was the Q&A department. And when Catholic Answers moved its focus to the Catholic School of Catholic Answers School of Apologetics and the speakers and these things more in conferences, and got away from the one-on-one Q&A, I saw that there was a need for that, and so I started Catholic Questions, and happy to do that. And I tell you, most of the time when we answer questions, we're sending them right back to Catholic Answers, to the resources that Catholic Answers has. So, because that's the best place for resources.
Yeah, it's just one of the wonderful things about Catholic.com here at Catholic Answers is, and I don't take any credit for this, I got here late, but is just decades of building up an answer to almost any question you could have about the Catholic faith. You got a question, and somebody's asked it.
Yeah, and a lot of times people they would like to call in and talk to an apologist today. I think Jimmy was on last hour.
Right.
Or talk to me this hour. There are people who still would like some personal guidance in, how can I answer this question? Where can I get additional resources? Can you direct me to resources I can trust? These kinds of things. And that's where we come in. We help people. We guide them to the right answers to their questions, or I should say to answers that are faithful to the magisterial teaching of the Church, and then we help them see why those answers are faithful, whether we're quoting the Catechism or Vatican II documents, or going to Catholic Answers website and providing them with a link to a tract for additional information, or recommending a 20 questions book or 20 answers book, something like that.
Our number here is 888-318-7884. I'll be honest with you right now. The lines are full to start the show, so lots of people have questions for our guest, Jim Blackburn. And if you haven't ever checked it out, check out CatholicQuestions.com. It's easy to find. You just type in CatholicQuestions.com and you get there. I think we better go right to the phones, though, Jim, because there is a load of folks on. All right, let's go to Robert in Missouri. Robert, thanks for starting us off this hour. Go ahead with your question for Jim.
Mm-hmm. My question for you, Jim, is in terms of Jesus Christ's relationship to the church, what is the difference between a mystical union, a spiritual union, or a physical union?
All right. I'm going to repeat it just because I think some listeners will not have heard it. So essentially, what's the difference between a mystical union, a spiritual union, and a physical union?
Oh, okay. Well, I would say, first, I would really want to see the context that those terms are being used in, because I don't know that they each necessarily have a specific, theological definition. At least, to my knowledge, mystical union is one certainly that does. Mystical union is a description of, say, a saint whose union with God is so great and has grown so great that he is in complete communion with God and no longer sins at that point, and is able to through the grace of God maintain that union then onto death. And some saints have attained that mystical union. There's I suppose the term could be used in a broader or more generic sense, but that's really the primary definition of that term that I'm aware of. When it comes to a spiritual union, I'm more familiar probably with the term spiritual communion. And that is what we do before we receive the Eucharist. We want to be in spiritual communion with Christ, with His church, and even if we, for some reason, are not able to receive communion, we want to, within ourselves and within the body of Christ, have that spiritual communion with one another and with Christ. And that is it's a friendship that we have. It's a mindset of unity. Physical union, I think, that term can be used in a lot of different ways, but I think a physical union is marriage. I know that there are some outside the Catholic Church who would use the term physical union in a way that we use marriage, but it would be without being married, without getting married. Well, we're not married, but we're in a physical union. I've heard the term used that way. So that's how I would initially address this question and those terms. I think if I could see them being used by Robert or whoever Robert is coming across them in context, might be able to be more help. But what's your thoughts, Sire?
Well, it's just interesting to hear you talk about it because you think of a term like I thought that was very helpful because I didn't know how you were going to answer that. But like you hear a term like mystical union, and you realize that it's sometimes used in a pious way, sometimes used in a theological way. Maybe it's used in a different way in the 15th century than it's used in the 20th century or the 21st century. Or one saint meant one thing by it and another meant another by it. So it's not like some of these very Catholic terms, we have a whole kind of set of terminology that's important, but that it's not like the word Trinity that, means the same thing all the time.
Right. It's not a well-defined theological term. And I don't know of any, I would say the closest of these that would be mystical union, because it very specifically refers to highest state of union with God in this life. Spiritual communion, I would say, is probably defined somewhere as that what we do before we receive the Eucharist or when we can't receive the Eucharist. Physical union, that's kind of wide open.
Right. Because even the reception of the Eucharist, in a sense, there's a physical contact between the person of Jesus and ourselves.
Sure.
But you never hear. I think you were right on with the way you broke it down. But Robert, I think what you'd have to do is take what you're reading to a knowledgeable, Catholic source, maybe a priest or someone else who's well educated, and say, what did it mean in this context? So I'm going to leave it there because I don't know that we can be more helpful than that, and I don't think we can get into all the context right now. Thanks very much for starting us off, Robert. I'm going to go to Connecticut now. Chris in Connecticut, watching on YouTube. Go ahead, Chris, with your question for Jim Blackburn.
Hey, thank you for having me. So my question is, because I couldn't find this anywhere online, is Padre Pio and Stigmata, do you think it's real? What's your position on it? What's the church's position? And if you think it's real, why did he have the hole through the palm of his hands and not the wrist, if many people believe that Jesus was crucified through the wrist, nailed to the cross through the wrists?
Okay.
My understanding is that Padre Pio did have the stigmata, and that it was, the church has a procedure for, verifying that this is worthy of belief, and I believe the church has done that when it came to the stigmata for Padre Pio. Whether or where the stigmata occurred, in the palms of his hands, while today we generally recognize that crucifixion in the first century, Roman crucifixion in the first century, would have pierced more through the wrists, probably is because that's the way that it's depicted in art. We don't know actually for certain exactly where Christ's hand or arm was pierced, and the hand could be something that is more than what we think of as a hand today. The hand could include the wrist. So to have the stigmata anywhere in that area, and especially since it's artistically portrayed that way, would seem to be appropriate for a person who's experienced the stigmata. So to my knowledge, it was authentic, and the stigmata can happen in a variety of ways. And for it to happen, actually, pictures I've seen of Padre Pio was very much through the palm of his hand, not what we think of as the wrist today. That's probably more because that's how it is commonly depicted in art, and how we generally think of when we see Jesus crucified on a crucifix. Oftentimes we see the piercings through palms of his hands and not his wrists. To be consistent with that, that's where Padre Pio experienced the stigmata. That's would be my understanding.
All right, Chris, we got to take a break, so I have to leave it there. But thank you very much for the question. It's a busy open forum today. We're going to answer lots more questions with our guest, Jim Blackburn, right after this.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connection's set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connection's website is homeschoolconnections.com.
The power of prayer simply means that words have an effect. For example, when a couple says, "I do," it literally changes two people to becoming one in marriage. When you say, "I love you," it changes us and it gives us value. The power of prayer is in the words and in the sentiment, but it's also in the fact that God, who is omnipotent, all-powerful, answers our prayers.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. It's open forum today, and lots of folks taking their opportunity to call, so we're quite busy. But before we go back to the phones and get some more questions for our guest, Jim Blackburn, we've got some really great Catholic Answers podcast episodes that I want to tell you about. Right now, the new one that's up is My Soul Immortal? Our good friend Carla Broussard answers some questions that I had, and I kind of thought, I want to have a clearer understanding of the immortality of the soul, and Carlo's a philosopher, and I asked him, so it gets a little philosophical, that one, but lots of people have found it helpful, as I did. We talked with Dr. Larry Chapp about whether the papacy of Pope Francis is self-defeating. It's an interesting conversation and a lot of Dorothy Day in it. So if you have an interest in Dorothy Day, you'll be interested in that one. We talked with Noelle Maring about her new book about being awake and not woke. The title of that one is What's Wrong with Woke? Scott Hahn, we did Rescuing the Bible from Experts, a stellar conversation, as always, with Scott Hahn. And Tim Staples, we asked him, is the church hiding the Book of Enoch? Why isn't the Book of Enoch in the Catholic Bible? What happened? And Tim gave us some great, helpful answers. You can find Catholic Answers Focus at CatholicAnswersFocus.com or wherever you get podcasts, or just go over to YouTube and watch it on YouTube. Our number again, 888-318-7884. Our guest is Jim Blackburn, and next on the line, we go to Vermont for Logan. Logan, thank you so much for your call. Go ahead with your question for Jim.
Oh my God. Hey, it's me again.
It's nice to hear you again, Logan.
So I got a question. It's a bit of an interesting one, and do cut me off if you can't answer it. So in the Bible, so should we as Christians expect our governments to follow a Christian ethic? And what I mean more so by that is, well, Jesus in the Bible says, no rich man can go through the heaven. The Bible often talks about how wealth is bad, etc. exonerate the poor, etc. Should we expect our governments to, have a left-wing economic policy while also sticking with firm Christian social values?
All right, Logan, thanks.
Yeah, without getting into left-wing, right-wing, Republican, Democrat, those kinds of things, I would say that we hold Christian values as Christians, as Catholics. We hold Christian values, and we should desire that our neighbors hold Christian values, and that includes our local governments and all the way up to our federal government. We should desire that. We should vote for that, for our values, and hope that our government would come around on some of these things where it hasn't. So should we expect that? Well, I think we should know better than to expect that it's going to happen, at least not 100%, and at least not overnight. But we can do our best to try to make that happen. That's why, as Catholics, we, rather than look at party line, their platforms and get into the left-wing, right-wing stuff, we should say, what's Catholic? And we know Catholic is pro-life, and so we should vote for pro-life. We should always vote in the direction of pro-life, and hope that abortion is something that is made illegal because it kills innocent children, and we know that's wrong. The same thing goes with marriage. We should support our government and laws that promote marriage and that recognize what marriage truly is, and keep that sacred in our communities. Religious freedom is something that we hold dear and have as a Christian value, and so we should vote according with those types of principles. So that, Logan, that's what I would say. You used the word expect. Should we expect our government to follow Christian values? I would say we should attempt to get them to. We should hope that government officials will and laws will be consistent with our Catholic and our values and our morals, and we should do everything we can to make that happen.
Logan, I always like it when you call. I'm glad you got through again. As I've been saying, though, we are very, very busy with calls, and so I'm going to keep moving and get as many on with Jim as I can. So we'll go to Washington now, listening on Ave Maria Radio. Cheryl in Washington, you're next. Go ahead, Cheryl, with your question.
Good afternoon, gentlemen,
Good afternoon.
And thank you very much for taking my call. My question is, I have a son who is just on his journey. He figured out football wasn't going to get us into heaven. And he keeps telling me, that the Catholic Church is withholding important books that belong in the Bible from us. And I'm wondering where in the heck he's getting that idea. And if so, why are they? And if not, how can I explain it to him so he'll go?
Has he named any of these books that are being withheld?
No, I don't think he really. I think he's just throwing. See, I just took my 3-year journey and followed up by my confirmation last February. And of course, I'm ecstatic. I'm excited. I don't know why anybody would question this because it's thrilling. And so I think he's just trying to, he's not saying that what I've done is bad. He's terrific. He's excited about that part of it.
But he's challenging the
coming
Catholic
up
Church.
With roadblocks. And of course, me being a baby, and I can't get him to listen to you guys. So what can I tell him?
Well, here's what I would do. I suspect maybe if he's thinking that the Catholic Church has withheld books from the Bible or has not canonized books that should be canonized, he may be talking about what we would consider to be apocryphal books from the early centuries of the Church. I don't know. Since you don't know, I don't know if that's what he's talking about, but that would be my suspicion. So what I would do if I were talking to him, Cheryl, is I would ask him, does he know how the Church came up with the list of books that we do believe or we do know to be part of Scripture, part of the Bible, and kind of take him through a history lesson of that. It isn't something that happened overnight. The books of the New Testament, for example, were written late into the first century. And it wasn't until really the 3rd century when all these apostolic letters, these various different gospels, various different books that some purported to be written by Mary Magdalene or others, that Thomas, for example, that these books were floating around. And it wasn't really until near the end of the 4th century that the church finally came up with a definitive canon, looking at which of these books have withheld the test of time, which of these books have been circulated since they were written, which of these books contain what we know to be truth, all of these kinds of things. And then the church settled first really at a synod of Rome in the year 382, but then after that it was ratified at councils of Hippo and Carthage, and down through the history of the church, that same canon or list of books that belong in the Bible, that same canon has been ratified again and again down through the history of the church. Now, in the 16th century, then, during the Protestant Reformation and the advent of books being thrown out of the Old Testament by Protestants, and even some Protestant leaders wanting to throw out parts of the New Testament, some of the New Testament books. It wasn't really until then, though, that the church finally dogmatically laid out that same canon, that going all the way back to the 4th century, dogmatically defined these books belong in Scripture and not others. So I think if he were to understand that, he might have a better realization of why we have and maintain the canon that we have. And it might help him recognize why other canons that say include books that are not in the Catholic Bible might be problematic. They might not have quite that history. They might not have been put together quite as authoritatively as the canon that we in the Catholic Church had. And go from there. There is a tract at Catholic.com titled Old Testament Canon, which specifically addresses the formation of the canon, and also it's called Old Testament Canon because ultimately Protestants did include all of the books of the New Testament in their canons. It was only Old Testament books, 7 Old Testament books, and parts of 2 other Old Testament books that they eventually discarded, took out of their Bibles. So if you look up the Old Testament Canon at Catholic.com, you maybe want to provide that to your son as a starting point.
You know what? I was mentioning the episode of Catholic Answers Focus that we did with Tim, and maybe it'd be fun for you to watch it. And if you're engaged by it, it might be something that you want to share with your son. You can just put in Catholic Answers Focus, Book of Enoch, and you'll come to it, because that one's about, there's a lot on the internet now about the church is hiding the Book of Enoch, and the Book of Enoch has secret knowledge that the Catholic Church doesn't want you to know, and that kind of thing. So in addition to the things that Jim just mentioned, maybe you want to just type in Book of Enoch, Catholic Answers Focus, and see if it's something that he would watch with you. All right, Cheryl?
Thank you very much. I appreciate your help.
All right. God bless you. Let's see. What are we doing now? Oh, we're going, hang on. We're going to a little place I like to call Detroit. Rob, watching on YouTube in Detroit. You are next, Rob. Go ahead with your question for Jim Blackburn.
How you doing? First of all, quit playing with your wedding ring. I'll show you my ring of old finger. It hurts. It's fine. Or never mind.
Wait, am I playing with my wedding ring on the on the video feed?
Yes.
I do that constantly. Stop pointing out my flaws on the radio.
Do you know what ring avulsion is? Do you know what ring avulsion is?
No.
I should send you a picture of my hand.
Nope.
It'll make you stop doing that. Anyway.
Okay. All right, go on.
Anyway, Anyway, by the way, I need to confess that I have to put you on speakerphone because I'm alone in my car, but I had an emergency.
Okay.
So now I have to do this to keep my hands on the wheel. So I just wanted to be honest there.
Okay. Oh, are you? Did we lose you? Wait, I'm confused. Was the confession the whole call, or was?
I think he was trying to switch to speakerphone, but I don't know if we lost him.
Oh, all right.
Rob, are you still there?
Now he's got me all upset about my wedding ring. I just can't deal with this. This is too much stress. I have to take a break. I'm sorry. Rob has utterly undermined my confidence in my own finger. Should I look that up, or is it going to be one of those things where it's going to be a gross picture on the internet of some swollen finger with? I'm not going to do it. I'll just stop playing with my finger. And Rob, we're going to come back to you. We'll see if we can get you. But this is a hard break, so I can't do anything about it. Jim Blackburn is our guest. It's open forum. Back with more of that right after this.
Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers is doing it again. We're holding our 7th annual Apologetics Conference this September in beautiful San Diego, California, and we'd like to see you there. Join us September 23rd to 26th for a lively and inspiring conference with an all-star lineup of speakers guaranteed to jumpstart your faith. It's a great chance to meet all your favorite Catholic Answers apologists and very special guests as we spend 4 days talking about worshiping and adoring our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. This is where it all begins. Don't miss what promises to be the event of the season. Join us this September for a conference that is sure to ignite, inspire, and inform your faith. Seats are still available, but they're going fast. Visit CatholicAnswersConference.com or call 888-291-8000 to register.
Here's a question. Is it really possible to be friends with someone who died 2,000 years ago? Maybe the problem is that we've grown way too comfortable with the story of Jesus. Nice man, right? Taught us to love one another, said not to judge people. We celebrate his birthday every year. It's time to put away this small, safe version of Jesus, says Cy Kellett. Nobody that bland could have transformed the world. In A Teacher of Strange Things, Cy presents Jesus Christ undiluted by sentiment, with all his radical words and deeds uncensored. Do you know someone, your son or daughter perhaps, or maybe your mom or dad, who needs the friendship of Jesus Christ? Do you? Order your copy of A Teacher of Strange Things by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
This is Dr. David Anders. Are your friends or family discouraging you from becoming Catholic?
We can help on Call to Communion tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern.
Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
I knew you were going to do it. I knew you were going to play groovy music twice. Makes me happy. It's open forum on Catholic Answers Live today. Jim Blackburn is our guest. Jim worked here at Catholic Answers for a long, long time, and we still have a close association. And one of the things that Catholic Answers did for a long, long time was provide personal answers to folks who had questions about the Catholic faith. And now Jim does that at CatholicQuestions.com, CatholicQuestions.com. And you don't do it alone, Jim. There's other people that help you there. You have other apologists working with you.
Yes, and we actually all were volunteers. So as of now, we've been doing this for about 9 months, I guess. We do this because our hearts call us to do it. We want to continue to offer the service. We want to help people. Of course, we do accept donations to pay the bills, but primarily, we want to have a venue still available for people to be able to one-on-one do what they're doing, say here, during a Catholic Answers Live Q&A open forum. But contact us anytime. And we generally are able to get back to people within a day or two at the most, and very glad to still be able to offer that. And we've found that many people are very happy that we have continued to offer it. So please take note of CatholicQuestions.com and contact us anytime.
And I'll take note of this before we go back to the callers. 4 lines all of a sudden opened up. So if you have a question, this is a perfect time to call. 888-318-7884. You don't have to be Catholic. You don't have to be Christian. Anybody can call. 888-318-7884. We go to Matthew in West Virginia. Matthew, there with us?
Yeah, I'm there.
Hi, Matthew. Go ahead with your question for Jim.
Yeah, so I've been, I guess, having a lot of, suicidal thoughts. And I've been an atheist for a long time, but I'm just wondering, how, faith could play a role in helping one have the will to live, if that makes any sense, and also what the Catholics' views on suicide are.
Okay, Matthew, I have you sought medical help? Because it's a very serious thing to be contemplating suicide. Have you sought?
I'm asking this just because I'm in the radio. I have sought medical help,
Okay.
and that is
Okay.
ongoing. So, yeah.
Okay, very good, very good.
Yeah, and Matthew, I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist. I'm a Catholic apologist, so I'm going to answer your question from that perspective. And I would actually ask you, as an atheist, if you were to commit suicide, once you have passed, what would be there? What would your experience be after that?
I wouldn't expect to experience anything. I think my brain would cease functioning, and then it would cease to perceive, and the consciousness that comes with that, I suppose.
Okay, that's what I fully suspected that you would answer with. And so I think the answer to your question is then, would faith do anything for you? I think it would, because if you were to embrace a faith like Christianity, you would have a different answer to that question. You would know that after you died, there would be something that would come after that. And if you die in the right state, we call it a state of grace in the Catholic Church, then what awaits you after death is beautiful, wonderful, everything that we were created for. And so we can have the joy and the expectation that that's what would happen after death. Now, I'm not saying necessarily that would happen after suicide, because then there's a question about if a person commits suicide, does he die in a state of grace? And the Catholic Church does teach that we can hope that a person who has committed suicide is not fully culpable of their actions. Maybe they didn't understand the gravity of what they were doing. Maybe a person was so suffering psychologically so much that it just reduces this suicidal person's culpability to maybe nothing, maybe no culpability. In which case, a person like that, we can hope for their salvation. But the other side of the coin is if we die not in a state of grace, which essentially means in friendship with God. If we die not in that state, then there is something for us after this life too, but it's a form of suffering, because we come to realize at that point, our eyes are opened in a sense, and we come to realize what we have chosen to forego. And that is, we chose to forego heaven by making some bad choices maybe in this life. And so we would not want to die or outside of a state of grace. But we live our lives, hopefully, so that at our point of death, which we don't know when that will be, we don't want to take our own lives. We know that's not for us to do. God didn't give us the authority to take our own lives. That's something that comes in God's time when He decides. And so if we wait for that moment and we try to live our lives maintaining or staying in a state of grace, and the Church helps us to do that with the sacraments, to remain in a state of grace, we can have what we call a happy death and die in a state of grace, and then go on to eternal joy with God in heaven, as which is what he really created us for. So Matthew, absolutely, if faith is something you're considering, it's the difference between darkness and light. Faith would give you a reason, I believe, to not commit suicide, because of first of all, you don't want to displease God in that way, but secondly, because you are moving forward in your life with hope for what we all hope for, and that is to live eternally with God in heaven. So I hope that helps, Matthew. Again, I'm not coming at it from a psychiatric view, coming at it from an apologetics view, meaning that just from a theological perspective and based on our faith, why embracing faith would, I think, help you to avoid suicidal thoughts and help you turn away from those.
Matthew, what do you think?
I mean, it was a good answer to help me understand the Catholic Church's perspective on these things. I was kind of just interested in the Catholic faith because I was hearing about Dorothy Day and some of the work they were doing and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
And I've always liked listening to Catholic radio, so it just kind of, if I did have a faith, I would probably be Catholic because I just like Catholic radio, honestly. So,
well, that's cool. That's actually very, very cool. I share your interest in Dorothy Day. I was a member of a Catholic worker house for a while, and we have a very famous bishop in the Catholic Church, Bishop Robert Barron, who says, people have different doorways into the church, and some the doorway is beauty, some the doorway is truth, and some the doorway is goodness. And Dorothy Day, I think, appeals to those people who are looking for the goodness doorway. The people who appreciate what she did for the poor, and that helps them to have hope and to come closer to God. If you would like, Matthew, I would like to send you 2 books. Our colleague Jimmy Akin wrote a book called The Words of Eternal Life, True Happiness and Where to Find It. And I'm pretty sure he wrote it for you. I don't know that he ever met you, but I'm pretty sure he wrote the book for you. And if you would like it, I would love to send it to you. For me, what makes life worth living is the person of Jesus. And so I wrote a book about Jesus, and I would also like to send you that book. You're welcome to say no. You don't have to take them. But I'd love you to have them, and maybe we can talk in the future. It's very kind of you to say that you enjoy listening to Catholic radio.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you guys do a good job, and you have, I don't know, it's not like what I would expect from Christian radio, like in the preachiness, like they're kind of grounded in what they believe in, and it just seems very, I don't know, there seems to be something honest about it usually when I listen, so I appreciate it.
Well, that's beautiful, and thank you very, very much. I hope that we'll continue with this conversation. You just hang on the line, and Thomas, who's handling the phones today, will get your information if you would like to get those 2 books. And I would particularly recommend Jimmy Akin's book, The Words of Eternal Life. I think they address exactly the kind of questions and seeking that you have right now. Jim Blackburn, did you want to say anything else before we let Matthew go?
Well, Matthew, I would just mention my organization is called Catholic Questions, and you can find us at CatholicQuestions.com. You can contact us anytime online, even give us a call, and we'll be happy to help you further if you need that.
Matthew, it's gratifying to speak to you. It always makes me, I'll tell you the truth, anxious when I hear people talking about suicide. But that there's medical help. Do not forego that medical help. And I think that when you maybe read Jimmy's book, you will at least have a sense of why we have so much hope and so much joy in the person of Jesus. And maybe that joy and that hope is for you as well. You are always welcome to call back here. I am going to go to a break, and we'll be right back with more Open Forum.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Go forth and preach the good news. It's not just a suggestion. If you want to take more seriously the command of Jesus to share the gospel with those around you, consider joining St. Paul Street Evangelization. It's a grassroots organization that brings the Catholic faith to the streets in a non-confrontational way. Visit our website, www.streetevangelization.com, to learn more. And don't forget to like us on Facebook. It's time to do our part.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
Isn't it awesome that we today do not recognize His presence in the Eucharist? Is it because we really don't go to Him in humbleness of heart and say, Lord, I don't believe, help my unbelief. Lord, I want to see you. I want to recognize you. I cannot live without you. Are we saying that?
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Brandon just doing an amazing job on the sound. And just, come on, Brandon, you're just killing it. I'm not saying that to say anything negative about Zach, who made a mess of it yesterday, but you're just doing a great job today. Our number is 888-31-TRUTH. Our guest is Jim Blackburn, and you can ask any question you want about Christianity, about the Pope, about the Bible. If we got a moral question, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. Let's go to Robert right here in California, listening to EWTN on channel 130 Sirius XM satellite radio. Go ahead, Robert, with your question.
My question is kind of a twofold question. Is homosexuality, the orientation, is that a sin by itself? And if not, then when does it become a sin? Is it emotional connection? Obviously physical connection. So,
Got
yeah.
it. Okay, Robert. Great, Robert. Thank you. Jim?
Okay, Robert, in the Catholic faith, the Church teaches that as a result of original sin, the fall of our first parents, that our human nature suffered and continues to suffer. And one of the sufferings of our human nature is what the Church calls concupiscence. Concupiscence is an inclination towards sin. Now, since original sin is really no fault of ours, it is something that we need to have washed away, but concupiscence is something that even after we're baptized, concupiscence remains. So it's not something that we're culpable of. If I have an inclination toward drunkenness, but I don't get drunk, then I'm not sinning. But that inclination towards sin is something that is a result of a fallen human nature. It's an inclination to do something I shouldn't do. Well, homosexuality is seen the same way. It's an inclination toward doing something we shouldn't do. If we choose to act out on that inclination, that's when we commit sin. So just having an inclination towards sin, which quite frankly, every one of us, whether we want to admit it or not, has an inclination towards sin of some kind. And it's only when we act out on that inclination, when we embrace that inclination even, that we sin. If we struggle with it, and maybe once in a while we do fall into that sin, but we don't embrace it, we go to confession, we confess our sin, we have the desire to not commit that sin again, we're really doing what we can. That's why Jesus gave us the sacraments, sacrament of confession in particular, to help us when we fall, and the sacrament of the Eucharist to continue to strengthen us with graces to fight sin. But to answer your question specifically, just a homosexual orientation of itself is not a sin. But when a person, knowing that inclination is gravely wrong and freely chooses to act out on it anyway, that's when he commits a serious sin.
Robert, does that all answer what you needed?
Yes, but just for clarification then, there can be an emotional connection without a physical connection. I guess I'm splitting hairs here.
I don't think that's splitting hairs at all. Those are quite distinct things.
Yes, and certainly I would say, Robert, if the relationship is one of friendship and one of, I would say, that comes out of an authentic Christian love. And an authentic Christian love is a love that truly desires for the other what God desires for that person. That type of a friendship, that type of a love for another, it's certainly something that's acceptable. But if it arouses the homosexual inclination, if it becomes sexual at all, that's where you really have to draw the line. And many people who do suffer from a homosexual inclination find it difficult to have relationships with other men who suffer from homosexual inclinations because it becomes a near occasion of sin for them. It becomes a constant source of temptation for them. And so I would encourage you only to have those types of relationships if you're seeking some spiritual help, spiritual direction. There is an organization in the Catholic Church called Courage. The website is couragerc.org, I believe. Mm-hmm. That is an organization just for men and women who suffer from a homosexual inclination but don't want to act out on that. They want to continue to live their lives in a way that's pleasing to God. And they know that this is an inclination towards sin, so they help each other within this organization to stay away from that, to live their lives in accordance with God's will for their lives.
Okay, Robert?
Thank you.
Thank you. And call back anytime. We do this every Tuesday and Thursday, open forum. And that's you can call other days too. I mean, we'll be happy to talk with you. Let's see. Let's go to, I'm going to say Yasmin in Salem, Oregon, listening on Modern Day Radio. Did I pronounce it right, Yasmin?
Hello?
Hello?
Hi.
Is this Yasmin?
This is she.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
And thank you for taking my call. I'm a long-time listener. I really enjoy the show. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I think my question is, I want to know the reason, if there was a reason why Christ descended to death after the crucifixion.
Yes, Yasmin, and there's a very good reason for it. That I would say you need to kind of start with an understanding of sacramental theology. Big terminology there, but if you understand what the sacraments are for in the Catholic Church, if you understand why we get baptized, and why when we sin again we go to confession, why we receive the Eucharist, why do we receive the sacraments? It's to put ourselves in and remain in a state of sanctifying grace. Well, prior to Jesus is the one who instituted the sacraments. Prior to Jesus coming and instituting the sacraments and giving us the church to administer those sacraments, people didn't have a way of fully receiving sanctifying grace necessary to live in heaven in the beatific vision. So what God would do, and we see this kind of a picture of this in the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, where Lazarus and the rich man both die, and they go to a single abode, the abode of the dead, often called hell. But Lazarus is in a place of comfort, being comforted by Abraham, and the rich man is across a great chasm that cannot be crossed by either of them, and he's in a place of suffering. And this kind of gives us an image, really, of what the afterlife looked like before Christ's institution of the sacraments and founding of the church and his death and resurrection. And when he died, he descended to that place where Lazarus was. The Catechism of the Catholic Church tells us that this was the hell that he descended to, the abode of the dead, those who were awaiting the gates of heaven to open to them. And so he went down to where they were, where parabolically we could say Lazarus was being comforted by Abraham, to that place. I should say, from a parable perspective. That's where Jesus descended into. And so at that point then, since he had accomplished for humanity what he came to accomplish, and these were people who died in God's friendship, he was able to then open the gates of heaven for them. So that's why he descended into hell after his crucifixion, so that he can open the gates of heaven for those who preceded him in death in God's friendship, but the gates of heaven had not yet been opened by Jesus' work on the cross, by his death and suffering, and by the institution of the sacraments and the founding of his church. Does that help, Yasmin?
Oh, yeah, wow. I didn't know that. So that was a great answer. Thank you very much. Yeah, it does make a lot of sense.
No, that's great. A satisfied customer, Jim Blackburn. Yasmin, thank you very, very much. I don't know why this happens to us. Like yesterday was a big Ohio day. Today's a big Oregon day. Lots of callers from Oregon. So we'll go to Joe in Oregon, listening on Ave Maria Radio. Joe, you there with us?
Yes, sir.
All right, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, my question is, I need a better understanding of what is meant by to fear the Lord your God, and anywhere in the Bible where the fear God is used. Just that word fear, I've struggled with that like my whole life. I'm 50, so
okay.
And I'm Catholic, and I need a little help with that. I'm driving right now, so I'm just gonna hang up and turn the radio back on. All right.
Well, before you go, Joe, can I ask you a question?
Sir.
Are you married?
Yes, sir.
And I hope I'm not putting you on the spot here, but do you love your wife dearly?
The immediate answer would be yes, but honestly,
okay.
I struggle
Let's
with
leave it at that.
What love
Let's
is.
leave it at that, Joe. Again, I didn't want to put you on this spot. Imagine loving someone so dearly that you fear harming that relationship, that you fear it. This was a way that I thought it was a beautiful way that actually Dr. Michael Barber explained this in a theology course that I took when I was getting my master's degree at John Paul II Catholic University. Fear of the Lord isn't that we're afraid of him, isn't that we fear him like we would a monster. No, fear of the Lord is fear of losing our friendship with him, fear of wronging him, fear of somehow being offensive toward him. That's one of, to me, the best explanations. I think, in a very layman's terms, understanding of fear of the Lord. And Joe, I would hope that would help some.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you very, very much. I think that's about it. We don't have time for more questions. Jim Blackburn has been our guest. Thank you very much for your calls. Jim, let people know again where they can get in touch with you. If they I need to ask another question of that Jim Blackburn, where could they get in touch with you?
Go to CatholicQuestions.com. You can ask your question online. There's an email address you can use if you want to. There's a phone number you can even call us. There's an address where you can write to us. So, whatever your fancy is, however you want to get a hold of us, just go to CatholicQuestions.com. You'll find all the information there, and we're happy to help.
Jim, thanks very much. It's always great to talk with you.
Thanks for having me, Cy. God bless.
On the way out here, I'll let you know, hey, you know what? If you're someone who runs an RCIA group at your parish, or maybe you'd like to get something for those who are, because RCIA starts in most parishes right around this time of the year. We've discounted books of 20 copies of Trent's book, Why We're Catholic. And so you can get a great deal on that. And a perfect time to share them with folks who are coming into or contemplating coming into the Catholic Church. just go to whywearecatholic.com. Whywearecatholic.com and see the deals on when you buy 20 in bulk to share with other people. That'll do it for us. We'll see you tomorrow, God willing, right here. Catholic Answers Live.